Welcome to Elections 2017. I'm Kelvin Kasper.
And I'm Hannah Jaku.
Anna, Papua New Guinea is heading into one of its biggest elections yet in history next year.
Yes, it is, and it will get more hectic as we go into the elections over the next few months.
That is correct. Every 5 years, Papua New Guinea goes to the polls where people elect new national leaders in the hope of taking the country forward. As part of its community obligation and as a key stakeholder in elections in the country, the NBC is bringing you Elections 2017, a live simulcast where over the next 9 months we'll bring you how the election is being played out and what its results mean for Papua New Guinea. This is our first program. It starts on a monthly basis with specific topics. In this first show, we take a look at the history of elections in Papua New Guinea.
Thank you, Kelvin. Election is an important government process in any democratic country. Understanding the significance of what its end results mean are just as important as taking ownership of it and, of course, effectively taking part in it. Papua New Guinea has since independence held 8 national elections, each of them significant in its own way. In this program, we take you back into history to have a look at some of these events. 2 documentaries will highlight, first, past elections and the emergence of the Electoral Commission over the last 40 years. We'll speak to Papua New Guinea's most distinguished electoral participant and politician, and one of Papua New Guinea's most revered founding fathers. Also tonight in the studio, we'll talk to the Electoral Commissioner. To be part of the show, you can text your comments to 1623 or contribute the same onto our news Facebook page. Papua New Guinea has held 8 national parliamentary elections in its history. The first was in 1977, soon after independence in 1975, and the last was that of 2012. Let's take a look into these important national events and how they played out.
Election in Papua New Guinea has come a long way. Prior to the national parliamentary elections, which began in 1977, 2 years after PNG gained independence, there were a number of other elections. These events were equally and primarily important in shaping the years ahead. "28 members had initially formed a legislative council in the 1960s. It comprised of 3 elected, 9 appointed, and 16 official members. Because there had to be at least 3 Papua New Guineans among the appointed members, so under the Papua New Guinea Act of 1963, the council became a House of Assembly with 64 members, 10 of them nominated official members. Under the House of Assembly, there were 2 elections, one in 1968 and another in 1972. The election of 1972 was particularly important as it was to take PNG into self-government. The House of Assembly then had 100 elected members with an additional 3 appointed and 4 official members, and Michael Somare became Chief Minister of a coalition government. Self-government was then granted at the end of 1973. In September 1975, Papua New Guinea proceeded to full independence, becoming an independent sovereign state as a constitutional monarchy with Queen Elizabeth II as head of state, represented by the Governor-General then, Sir John Guise.
The question that one asks, very sincerely, have we achieved anything? Have we secured our identity? Have we allowed this type of government to conflict with our cultural heritage?
So Michael Somare became Prime Minister at Independence Day.
One stage in Australia, I said, oh, I don't see it, I cut out myself to be the Prime Minister. I think that's one of my quotations in Australian paper. I never thought, by forming the first political party that we would be able to see it through. But then when I know that I had a lot of support from young Papua New Guineans, I thought, well, I think we should be able to make it.
In 1977, Papua New Guinea staged its first national election and Sir Michael was returned as Prime Minister. However, he was ousted 3 years after and replaced by Julius Chen. In 1982, the country went to the polls for the second time and Sir Michael was returned as Prime Minister. The third national election was in 1987 and Pius Wingti became Prime Minister. Just over a year later, Wingti was ousted in a vote of no confidence and replaced with Rabin Amaliu. Wingti was returned as Prime Minister in the fourth national elections in 1992. However, 2 years later, in 1994, Wingti was ousted in a Supreme Court ruling and Julius Chen returned to replace him. Chen did not last until election time. He was ousted mid-1997 over the Sandline crisis. A caretaker government under then Mining and Petroleum Minister John Guiano came into place as the country went into the fifth national election. Late Bill Skate became Prime Minister then. However, his reign was short-lived when he lost the support of his coalition and resigned over a corruption scandal and a financial crisis in 1999. Late Skate's fall saw the rise of Mekere Morauta as Prime Minister. Morauta took the country into the sixth national election in 2002, a chaotic and violent event. Observations and records say lives were lost and the election was extended for 4 weeks beyond the scheduled 2-week voting period. 6 electorates in the islands region could not be declared because of sabotage and destruction of ballot boxes. Sir Michael Somare's National Alliance Party won 19 of the declared seats and he became Prime Minister for the third time. In 2003, the Organic Law on Political Parties and Candidates came into place to strengthen regulation of political parties and enhance political stability. This law enabled the Somare government to be the first to serve a full 5-year term in office. The 7th national election in 2007 was historical. Apart from returning Somare for a second term in office, it saw a change in Papua New Guinea's electoral system. From the first past the post system, Papua New Guinea went into election under the limited preferential voting system. 2010 is another historical year for the country. It began in a string of events which deeply impacted the executive, legislative, and judicial arms of government and dented, to some extent, the last national election in 2012. In 2010, the Supreme Court had ruled parts of the OLIPEC unconstitutional, allowing the return to a more fluid political environment. Suffering this initial blow to a law his government helped legislated, Sir Michael Somare went on to face a leadership tribunal for breaching the OLIPEC. Trouble has begun. In 2011, the Leadership Tribunal suspended Sir Michael from office for 2 weeks. Somare then departed for Singapore for medical treatment for a heart condition. His absence from Parliament extended after his condition became serious. Parliament then went on to declare Sir Michael's seat and the office of the Prime Minister vacant over speculation Somare will not be able to resume. The House went on to elect then Transport and Works Minister Peter O'Neill as Prime Minister. Sir Michael Somare recovered and returned to PNG in September 2011. By then, Parliament's election of Mr. O'Neill was already being challenged in the Supreme Court. In December 2011, the court ruled the replacement of Somare unconstitutional. The months leading up to the 2012 national elections were plagued by a series of events which rendered the political and legal environment an extremely complex one for elections. In response to the Supreme Court challenge to the government of Peter O'Neill, Parliament responded by passing a law which sought to retrospectively legitimize the installation of O'Neill and to prevent Somare resuming the prime ministership by applying an age limit of 72 years on the office. The O'Neill government also made 2 attempts to suspend the Chief Justice, Sir Salmo Injia, and a subsequent attempt to arrest him, citing alleged misconduct unrelated to the political case. The Supreme Court rejected all these and issued orders restraining any action against the Chief Justice. January 2012, a small group of military officers briefly took up arms against the O'Neill-appointed commander of the PNG Defence Force, claiming the authority of Somare as the lawful Prime Minister. The situation was diffused by police and military loyal to O'Neill. March 21, Parliament passed the Judicial Conduct Act, vesting retrospective powers in the legislature to institute a procedure which could lead to the dismissal of a judge. Critics within PNG and internationally expressed concern that the act created the potential for parliamentary interference in the judiciary and that it was unconstitutional. April 4, Chief Justice Sir Salmo Injia and Justice Nicholas Kirwom rejected an application by the O'Neill government to rescue themselves from ongoing case on the legality of the government in response to claims of bias. Following this decision, Parliament invoked the Act to refer the 2 judges to the Governor-General for alleged misconduct. The next day, April 5th, Parliament voted to delay the national elections by 6 months, citing concerns about the readiness of the Electoral Commission. Elections are constitutionally required by mid-year. Constitutional experts advised that Parliament had no power to do so and that only the Governor-General could delay the elections on advice from the Electoral Commissioner, but the Speaker of Parliament maintained that the doctrine of parliamentary supremacy enabled the legislature to make the decision. April 7, Prime Minister O'Neill addressed the nation, saying that Parliament may have been advised wrongly to defer the elections and that if the Electoral Commissioner advised Cabinet that he was ready to proceed, the polls would go ahead on schedule. The Prime Minister defended the Judicial Conduct Act, saying it was consistent with the Constitution and the separation of powers by curbing an overarching judiciary, which he said had intruded on the powers of the Parliament and Executive. April 10, thousands of demonstrators staged protests in Port Moresby and Lae against the proposed election delay and the Judicial Conduct Act. The Prime Minister addressed the main rally in Port Moresby and announced that following the Electoral Commissioner's brief to Cabinet the previous day, the polling would go ahead as scheduled. On the Commissioner's advice, a 3-week delay occurred in the issue of writs to allow the rolls to be adequately finalized, with the campaign period shortened accordingly. April 11, the next day, in a reference against the constitutionality of the Judicial Conduct Act, the Supreme Court found that there was a prima facie appearance of the unconstitutionality and illegality in the Act and issued a stay on its enforcement, including the actions to suspend Justices Injia and Kirwom pending a final outcome of the case. The Speaker of Parliament refused to entertain the Prime Minister's request that Parliament reverse its decision to delay the elections on the same day April 11. May 18, on the advice of the Electoral Commissioner and in accordance with the announced revised timetable, the Governor-General dissolved Parliament and issued the writs for the national elections. May 21, a majority 3-2 judgment of the Supreme Court confirmed its decision of December 2011 that the appointment of Peter O'Neill as Prime Minister was unconstitutional and ordered that Sir Michael Somare be reinstated to the office. The two dissenting judges refused to deliver their judgments and stated their opinion that the majority should not have done so, citing ethical concerns over the allegations of bias against the Chief Justice and Justice Kirwom. May 22, the next day, Sir Michael Somare sought an audience with the Governor-General to be sworn in, but was turned away from the Government House by police. The Governor-General's office subsequently stated that the Governor-General have issued the writs for elections and would not sign anything until after a new government was elected. May 24, O'Neill's Deputy Prime Minister Belden Nama entered the Supreme Court with police and soldiers seeking to arrest the Chief Justice. Following a standoff in the court for some hours, the Chief Justice and Justice Kirwom were arrested and charged with sedition. May 25, the next day, the O'Neill government reconvened Parliament after two attempts which failed due to lack of quorum and an ultimately unsuccessful blockade of Parliament by police loyal to Somare. In an attempt to prevent the third, Parliament passed a motion purporting to nullify the Supreme Court's ruling of May 21 and also moved to establish a state of emergency in two provinces, Ella and Southern Islands, and the National Capital District, stating that this was necessary to ensure law and order in the lead-up to the elections. The Governor-General's office subsequently stated that the Governor-General had signed no instrument lawfully reconvening Parliament following its dissolution on May 18, and moreover that he would not sign instruments establishing the state of emergency. The Governor-General subsequently left the country, and in accordance with the constitutional provisions, the Speaker of Parliament became acting Governor-General, while the Deputy Speaker would act in the Speaker's role. May 29, under these arrangements, Parliament was reconvened again in the absence of both prime ministerial claimants. The acting Speaker ruled that the Supreme Court's decision of May 21 was valid, and therefore Sir Michael Somare was the legitimate Prime Minister. Having done so, he immediately declared Sir Michael Somare's seat in Parliament and the office of Prime Minister vacant on the basis that Sir Michael had contravened standing orders by missing 3 consecutive sittings of Parliament during 2012. The acting Speaker directed Parliament to convene and elect a new Prime Minister the following day. May 30th. Parliament did so, electing Peter O'Neill by a vote of 56-0 on May the 30th. Sir Michael Somare was not present. Mr. O'Neill and his cabinet were sworn in later that day by the acting Governor-General. As the election began, therefore, Mr. O'Neill remained in effective control of the caretaker government, while Sir Michael and his supporters remained adamant that Sir Michael was the legitimate caretaker Prime Minister then. The hope was widely expressed that the political and legal chaos could be resolved through a successful election with a clear and accepted result. And on this very extreme background, PNG went into its 8th national elections in 2012. Interesting insight into national elections conducted over the years. You're watching and listening to a simulcast of Elections 2017. We'll be back with more.